The Washington Capitals are not trading Tom Wilson, at least according to Elliotte Friedman.
Your Locked On Capitals, your daily podcast on the Washington Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Well, hello and welcome into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm so glad you decided to join me today. As always, this podcast is free and available on all the major platforms. And I want to thank you for making this your first listen or view of the day. Yes, this podcast is also available in video form, so head on over to YouTube and check it out. My name is Dan Holme. You can find me on Twitter. It's at DanCaps218. You can find the show on Twitter. It's at Locked On Caps. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. So in this edition of Locked On Capitals, I talk about Axel Jonsson-Fjällby. Yes, a name that we have not spoke of for quite some time. Would he be a good fit on the Capitals, considering that he is a free agent and has a rapport with Spencer Carbery? We'll talk about that in the show. A little bit later, we will talk about Erik Karlsson. I know that's really swinging for the fences, and if Brian McClellan could connect on that, that could be huge for the Caps blue line. Is it a reality? We'll talk about that, but Tom Wilson is not getting traded away from the Washington Capitals, at least according to Elliotte Friedman and the 32 Thoughts podcast. And where this all comes from, and I get asked this quite often, is, Dan, why do you keep bringing up the idea of Tom Wilson getting traded from the Capitals? Don't you know what Brian McClellan said? He said that he would like to sign him to a new deal. And Tom Wilson said he would like to retire as a Capital, and he does not want to play hardball. But then he said certain things like, crazier things have happened. What does that ultimately mean? And then also you take a look at Stephen Whyno from the Associated Press, who spoke on the Daily Faceoff, saying that he could see Tom Wilson getting traded from the Capitals. And where does that come from? Where does that thought process come from? Let's face it, Tom Wilson is a big piece on this team. He is known all around the National Hockey League for his physicality, his leadership, and his goal scoring. Rarely do you see all three of those traits in one hockey player. To an outsider, I've heard people say that he's a goon, he's a tough guy. If you think that way, then you are definitely not a fan of hockey or the Capitals, or you just aren't paying attention. A couple seasons ago, he led the team. He was in the top 3 in goals. And had he not been injured last season, he was positioned to have another 50-plus point season. Those guys do not exactly grow on trees. So guess what? He holds tremendous value. There's not a lot of other players on this team anymore that hold tremendous value. You could put Alex Ovechkin in that equation, of course, but let's roll down the list here a little bit. Nick Backstrom, yeah, maybe 3-4 years ago. TJ Oshie, yeah, maybe 3-4 years ago. John Carlson, okay, he has some value there, but then you take a look at Kuznetsov. He's already got one foot out the door. Anthony Mantha, same thing for him. Who is one guy on this team that holds tremendous value and is positioned to be a free agent in the near future? Class, anyone? Hands? Me, I got it. Tom Wilson. There is not one of the other 32 teams around the NHL that would not love to have Tom Wilson for the very reasons that I mentioned off the top of the show. Of course, I hate the idea. Some people are saying, why do you want it? I don't want it. I hate the idea. I was one of the first to speak about, you can take a look back on the show. I've been doing it for quite some time. I've hosted shows on the Capitals on multiple platforms. I've spoke about this for quite some time, that I see Tom Wilson being the future captain of the Capitals, but he's got to be a Capital to be the captain of the team, right? At some point. I don't think it's going to happen, obviously, until Ovi hangs up the skates, but I don't want that to happen, but the rumor mill is churning, and this is getting into be what they call the crazy season. Between now and free agency is when July 1st is when he could sign a new deal. Let's get it done, Brian McClellan. Let's get it done so I can stop talking about it because my conspiratorial mind kind of goes in that direction. How crazy would that be for the Capitals to trade Tom Wilson? And everyone's, it's not going to happen. They would never trade someone of that caliber. Then maybe you've never heard of a player before called Wayne Gretzky. Yes, even the great one was traded at one time. So to say it is not possible is ludicrous and short minded. And ultimately, you don't know what's going on in hockey. Could you imagine the return that Tom Wilson would yield? That could jumpstart this team like nobody's business. You're not going to just get one great player. You're going to probably get a couple great players and multiple draft picks. I see why. I know why Stephen Whyno said it. And people are like, "Well, who's Stephen Whyno?" Let's face it. He works for the Associated Press, which is not just, some blog writer from someone's garage. It's a legit organization, and he has covered this team for a long time. And I know that you can't take Stephen Whyno's words to the bank and cash it, but he does have his finger to the air and kind of can sense things. And you could say the same thing could be said about Elliotte Friedman. But the interesting thing, and everyone points to the 32 Thoughts podcast, and I listen to it. If you want to be in the know when it comes to the NHL, it is a must listen. Don't get me wrong. Jeff Merrick, Elliotte Friedman, I love those guys. But, one of the things is he said that during the season, towards the end of the season, he heard a lot of chatter about Tom Wilson, getting traded and that kind of thing. And he said, now that the season's over, and I'm paraphrasing, I'll go into it a little bit more in depth here in a moment. He goes, I looked into it and he asked someone and they said, there's no way that's going to happen. Who was that you asked? Did you ask Brian McClellan? Well, of course, that's what he's going to say. He didn't list his source, and rarely do they list their source, but I would be interested to know who that source is. Brian McClellan is well known for holding his cards close to the vest. I don't think he would divulge it. I don't think, Elliotte Friedman, he is the premier insider. I'm going to say the biggest insider there is out there, kind of like the Adam Schefter is in the NFL. That's who Elliotte Friedman is. I respect him, but I can't necessarily take his words to the bank. I really, really, really hope that he's right. And Tom Wilson, they sign him to just this crazy long deal. I'm usually against the idea of signing players to long-term deals for a lot of money. But for someone like Wilson, go ahead and back up the Brinks truck to his house, give him the checkbook, tell him to fill it out, whatever he wants. Let's get it done. That's where I'm at with that. And this news is breaking. People are saying, why do you bring it up? Because his name gets brought up, and he is a big name on this team. So I think that he deserves his name getting brought up here. Like I said, Sportsnet's Elliotte Friedman provided an update on the Wilson situation on his podcast and said that when he reached out to ask about the 29-year-old status and availability, he was rejected and told that any kind of deal was out of the question. So what is the one team that we have heard that had kicked the tires on Tom Wilson? And what does that mean? I've heard some people say, and maybe they're young people, they haven't heard that expression before, but it's to see the availability and what it would take. Kick the tires. And that team is the Los Angeles Kings. That has been somewhat substantiated. The other team that has been talked about from various different sources is the Toronto Maple Leafs. So to dismiss the reports that the Kings and the Toronto Maple Leafs, that there's no package that they could assemble to put together. It could be a multi-team package, to get Tom Wilson somewhere. I get that. I was told it's not happening. I was told the Capitals want to keep him and they consider him a big part of the future. It seems like something that, Brian McClellan said verbatim. I mean, did he just read his postseason presser? The update comes after reports that the Los Angeles Kings kicked the tires, like I talked about. Washington want to hold on to Wilson is no surprise. The Ontario native has emerged as a huge part of the Capitals culture and is one of the most respected voices in the locker room. That is the kind of value he holds. So to all the people that say, why do you bring it up? You don't think that, a lot of the other teams in the NHL wouldn't give them the Capitals pretty much whatever they wanted. Not only that, but Wilson said he won't play hardball in quotes with the next contract and expressed his desire to finish his career in DC. The feeling is mutual for GM Brian McClellan and the organization, especially when it comes to his growth. This was in the hockey news here. So an interesting thing, of course, like I said, I would love nothing more for them to get a deal done so I can stop talking about it. I don't want to talk about it, but I can kind of sense where all these people are coming from when they say the potential of him getting traded. While he's still a physical presence, Wilson has steered clear of disciplinary action of late and has emerged as a vital top six forward and a penalty killer. This guy brings so many qualities that, I mentioned three off the top, but there's much more. That is why the Capitals have got to get it done. In the end, Washington holding on to Wilson is the best bet. He's a key veteran presence to have when the Alex Ovechkin era ends, especially as the team starts to integrate youth into the room. Not only that, but he's also arguably the next captain. This was in the hockey news as well. So they reflect my sentiment here. Wilson becomes eligible to sign an extension on July 1st. Brian McClellan, if there's any chance that you're listening to this or watching this, let's get a deal done on Wilson right now. Sooner the better. What is it? What do you need to hear anymore? So on July 1st, let's get it done. Let's find a way to get him a new deal on July 1st. Mission one, above and beyond everything else, July 1st, get it done. Brian McClellan. I really hope that you will. Until that point, there's a part of me, a concerned Caps fan, maybe a bit of a paranoid Caps fan, that something crazy could happen, because as Caps fans, I just want you to humor me for a moment. The people, the everydayers that I talk about this on a regular basis. Everydayers, I love you. All of you out there, everydayers. Thank you very much. If this is the first time that you're listening to the podcast or watching it, this is what it's about. Not exclusively, but I hold dear a lot of these players as I've watched this team for so many years. But could you imagine this team minus Tom Wilson right now? They weren't that great last year, and we saw what they were like for a good chunk of the season without him in the equation. Let's get it done. All right, so coming up here, we will talk about, should the Capitals go after Erik Karlsson? I know that he has some teams that he will not go to. Are the Capitals on that list? Let's talk about Erik Karlsson straight ahead. So, game time. One of the things is, it's summer now and you have events coming to your city or town, but sometimes it's hard to find tickets. That is why you need Game Time. Buying tickets to your favorite events shouldn't be stressful. Game Time is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater near you. With killer deals on last minute tickets and their best price guarantee, you can stop stressing over the tickets and start getting hyped over the fun that you'll have. Because let's face it, summer is short. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download the Game Time app. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Make sure and subscribe or follow Locked On Capitals wherever you find your podcasts, and on YouTube. I have a lot of great guests for you. Next week, I have the host of Locked On NHL Prospects on the show as we break down the prospects within the Capitals organization. I will also be on Locked On New York Rangers as I talk about Peter Laviolette and ultimately what kind of coach are the Rangers getting, not to mention that I got you guys covered for free agency and the draft. So subscribe or follow Locked On Capitals today. All right, in this next segment here, we are going to talk about Erik Karlsson on the San Jose Sharks, who has been said wants to leave the team. He wants to play on a competitive team, and it's not his belief that the Sharks are a competitive team. Historically, the Sharks haven't been that bad of a team, but the last few years, not so good. So would Erik Karlsson be a good fit on the Caps blue line? We can worry about where he's going to fit in later. If you can get a player like Erik Karlsson, you'll find a way to get him in there. I know that it's a crowded blue line with Rasmus Sandin with a deal and all that kind of stuff. You take a look at TVR, and it's pretty full. Suffices to say, TVR and Jensen. Where would he fit in? That is a topic for a different day. If the Caps could land someone like Erik Karlsson, that could be huge, but it's not as easy as it sounds. For one, he is going to require a lot of money, a lot of term. He also has a no move list that he has, and I don't know if the Capitals are a part of that, but if the Capitals are not on that list, he could be a huge improvement for the Capitals blue line. And this isn't the first time that this was spoke of. I hate to reference Elliotte Friedman so much, but this was spoke of earlier in the season, or actually November 20th, 2022 is when the last time I heard about this on the 32 Thoughts podcast. He wondered and clarified that this is not an official report if the team could not only be interested in Bo Horvat, pending Nicholas Backstrom's future, but if San Jose Sharks blue liner Erik Karlsson could also make sense for the club. And at the end of the day, it's an interesting thought to consider, writes Elliotte Friedman of Sportsnet in the 32 Thoughts podcast. That was some time ago. Now let's kind of just turn it around and bring it up again as we record this in June. Brian McClellan said that he wants to address the blue line. Can he truly swing for the fences, connect like he did with Darcy Kemper last offseason, and bring Erik Karlsson to the district? That would be most impressive. I would be impressed. The San Jose Sharks and their star defensemen are on the same page about working out a swap after his representatives met with the management last week. TSN's Pierre LeBrun reported Thursday on Insider Trading. Karlsson wants to play for a contender while the Sharks are looking to rebuild, added LeBrun. There's no guarantee a trade materializes given the Swedish veteran's hefty contract and no movement clause. But a few teams have reportedly inquired about his availability in recent days. Are the Caps one of them? You got to think that if the Caps aren't on that list, on that no movement list, that GM Brian McClellan has had to use the term again, kick the tires on Erik Karlsson. That could be a huge upgrade for the Caps. He became the oldest blue liner ever to notch at least 100 points in a season, only the sixth regard to ever accomplish the feat, and the first since Brian Leach in 91-92. San Jose exploring dealing Karlsson before the trade deadline, reportedly engaging in talks with the Oilers at multiple junctures. The former Ottawa Senator captain is under contract for another 4 seasons with 11.5 million cap hit, according to Cap Friendly. The no move clause extends for its duration. So, one thing I will say is he has one heck of an agent that was able to orchestrate the money and the no movement clause. So kind of a shout out to his agent for, making it sticky so he's not going to get bounced around from team to team to team. If he's moving, it's going to have to be with Erik Karlsson's blessing. But what does this mean for the Capitals? It could be huge. Let's face it, this team struggled last season, and while their blue line is pretty good right now, all things considered, Erik Karlsson could be a huge upgrade. And if you're a fan of the NHL or even kind of just followed his career with the Sharks, with the Senators, he brings it. And, he, like they were talking about there about his accomplishments, if he could bring that level of play to the Caps, that could be a game changer. Not so crazy about the length of the deal and how much he's getting paid. Where would that fit? Obviously, the Capitals would have to move out some money to accommodate that. A lot of money. Let's just get to brass tacks here. They would have to move a lot of players and money in order to accommodate Erik Karlsson on this team. If for some reason GM Brian McClellan is able to craft such a move by moving this guy here and that guy there and moving this guy out and restructuring this deal, then I'm all about it. But it does seem difficult. But I am just because this is the off season, pondering the possibility of what could be. How great could that be for the Capitals to have Erik Karlsson on the blue line, kind of just holding it down, having John Carlson out there? It could be a game changer. All right, so straight ahead, we will talk about Axel Jonsson-Fjällby. Axel Jonsson-Fjällby, hasn't he come and gone from this team a couple times? Well, yes, he has, but would now be the perfect time for him to come back to this team? We'll talk about that straight ahead. All right, our next partner is Bird Dogs, and let me tell you, I love me some Bird Dogs. Go ahead, guys. Take those cargo shorts that you've been wearing for the last 20 years and throw them in the garbage. You should have done it 20 years ago. Buy some Bird Dogs. Bird Dog stretch khaki shorts are designed to fit slimmer through the thigh and leg, giving you a truly sculpted look. Bird Dog shorts do the exact same thing as Lululemon, but fit way better. They fit way better than regular shorts and are made of a stiff, restricting cotton. Bird Dogs fixed the issue by inventing a cloud knit fabric that looks just like khaki, but stretches so you get a way slimmer fit without having to sacrifice movement. And that's what it's about. So go to birddogs.com/lockedonnhl for a free Yeti style tumbler with your order. I already got my tumbler in the mail. I've been bringing my coffee every day to work in it. It makes it worth it just because of that alone. That's birddogs.com/lockedonnhl for a free Yeti style tumbler with your order. You won't take off your Bird Dogs. We promise you. All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So, in this next segment here, we are going to talk about AJF. Axel Jonsson-Fjällby, if you're nasty, he is a player that has come and gone from this team a couple times. And, do the Capitals ultimately want to retread a tire on Axel Jonsson-Fjällby? Why do I bring this up? Well, because there is a rapport, there is a relationship, a former relationship between him and Spencer Carbery, and Axel Jonsson-Fjällby is a free agent. So would it be a good fit? Signing Jonsson-Fjällby would be a homecoming of sorts for the Swedish winger who spent parts of 4 seasons in the Caps organization. During that time, he spent parts of 3 seasons under the guidance of Carbery with the AHL's Hershey Bears. What do we know about Spencer Carbery? What was the mandate, other than winning a cup, to Spencer Carbery is to finally integrate some youth into this team? Something that the last few coaches have been hesitant to do. See, Peter Laviolette and Reardon and Barry Trotz. They just weren't really, too keen, shall we say, on bringing along Connor McMichael, a player that is a lightning rod. Or a lightning rod. Every time I bring up Connor McMichael's name, people are, they have an opinion on Connor McMichael, suffices to say. So I think, the same reason that, Spencer Carbery is good for Connor McMichael because of the history and they know each other and they want to integrate youth, he could be great for Axel Jonsson-Fjällby as a depth piece, perhaps, at the end of the day. AJF saw most of his success under Carbery in 1920, tallying 23 points in 61 games. 2 seasons later, with Carbery then an assistant with the Toronto Maple Leafs, AJF blossomed with 34 points in 44 games in Hershey. However, he couldn't stick in Washington and was waived by the team twice in 2 years. This piece in Washington Hockey Now. Again, I'm not saying it's the right answer, but he could be a good depth piece if they could get him for the right price. That would be key. With Winnipeg Jets last season, the 25-year-old tallied 14 points, 6 goals, 8 assists across 50 games. He's not a game breaker, but as the Capitals refresh their bottom lines, a player already familiar with the organization and coaching staff could have an advantage so long as the price is right. And I agree with that assessment. For me, you're asking me here in June, if the price is right, even if the price is right, would you want to bring someone like Axel Jonsson-Fjällby back to this team? A retread, if you will. Been there, done that. What do they think that they would have in AJF that they don't have down in Hershey? again, if you could get him on ultimo cheap price and, just kind of keep him, in the deep freeze, almost kind of like a Matt Irwin, and just, thaw him out when needed, then okay, sure, I'm game. But anything else other than that, nah, I guess that's going to be a hard pass for me. But those are some of the things that are being spoke of in the offseason. And given the fact that he is a free agent and there is the rapport, the relationship with Spencer Carbery, that's where the idea emanates from. But for me, I think that they have plenty more talent down in Hershey that is just waiting for their opportunity. I would take Joe Snively over him. I would take, Connor McMichael, Hendricks Lapierre, Ethan Frank, pretty much any of those players over Axel Jonsson-Fjällby. So for me, that's a pass, but I can see where the thought process comes from. All right, I want to thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals. And are you a fan of other DC sports? Well, Locked On has you covered with Locked On Nationals, Commanders, and Wizards. So all of DC sports are covered. And shout out to the everydayers. Are you an everydayer of Locked On Capitals? Hit me up on Twitter at DanCaps218 or at Locked On Caps and say, Dan, I'm an everydayer. I'll give you a shout out on Friday's show. So once again, thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Dan Holme, and I'll talk to you again next time.